Hey there, I'm Soundy, and this is how to make a top-down 2D RPG in Unity. Welcome to Episode 5, Basic Player Animation. In this tutorial, we'll be animating the player character as they move left and right using code. To get started, let's see where we left off last time. So if we Control P to play, and then we move our character around, you'll notice that our character moves based upon the W, A, S, and D inputs, and we can also use the arrow keys. But we're currently lacking any sort of animation for our character. So let's fix that. So we'll stop play mode, and we'll go Game, Player, Visuals, Sprites, and we'll go ahead and just hit this little arrow here to expand out our sprites. Now what we're going to want to do is grab these 4 frames of our animation, which will make up our right hand facing movement animation. So what I'm going to do is select the first one, shift click the last one, and then drag those into the scene. Now this is going to prompt us to create a new animation clip. So we're going to use a nice naming convention where we go from the least specific to the most specific. So in this case, it's an animation clip. So I'm going to use the shorthand anim. It's for the player, and it's a movement in the right hand direction. So anim, player, move, right. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit save there. That's going to create a couple things for us. It's created the animation clip down here. It's created an animation controller, which we're going to rename. So I'm going to press F2. I'm going to do AC, short for animation controller _ player. Okay, it's also gone ahead in the hierarchy over here, and even in the scene view, created us a new game object with a sprite renderer and an animator. So if we just change the sorting layer to character, we can see that in the scene now. And if we just Control P to play, you can see this character is indeed animating through those 4 frames that we just dragged in. So if we just stop that, and then we go ahead and just delete him, we no longer need that. What we want is on our player over here, if we expand him out, so we go player visuals and then character, we want to add an animator. So if we just type anim, and then for me it's the second one down, it's just animator. And what we're going to want to do is drag and drop our animation controller into that slot. Then what we'll do is Control P just to test, and there we go, there's our animation. So what we can notice actually while we're in play mode is this is going a little bit quick. So if we want to adjust the speed of our animation, there's a couple of ways we can do, but my favorite is if you double click your animation controller, it'll open the animator window. And let's just clean this up a second. So our animation clip is here that we've just made. And if we run the game, you can see if we select our character in the hierarchy, you can see that it is executing. Now what we can do is actually change the speed here. So if you select it in our inspector over here, we can change the speed to be whatever we want. Now if we change this to be 10, you'll notice that our character is going full jackhammer. Okay, so if we want to slow it down, we need to go sub 1. So for example, 0.5. And if we take a look, that's looking a little bit better, but I'd say it's a little slow. If we just move them around, it's not quite matching up. So I think for me, I'm going to go 0.7. Okay, and then I'm just going to stop play mode, and you'll notice that it has retained our value even though we were in play mode. It's always a good idea though to double check this, because Unity can be a little funny sometimes. So with our movement animation, let's go ahead and create an idle animation. Now for us to do this really simply, we can duplicate our movement animation. I'm going to use Control D to duplicate. I'm going to press F2 to rename, and I'm just going to change it from move to idle right. Okay, and now I'm just going to drag this into our animation controller. All I do, left click and drag and drop it in there. Now with our idle, what we're going to want to do is actually adjust the animation itself. So I'm going to double click on this. That's going to open our animation window, and I'm just going to dock it down here for now. Okay, and if by the way you can't find these, if you go window at the top and then animation, they're both in there, the animator panel and the animation. So if we just click into our window, okay, and we press Control and A, that's going to select all the keyframes for us, okay? And again, you need to be clicked into this window. And then if we press F on our keyboard, that's going to focus on those keyframes for us. So now we can see all of them. Now if we come over here, there's a little drop down arrow. Okay, if we expand that out, you can see we can now see the sprites themselves, which is super useful, especially because what we want is to remove a couple of these sprites. So I'm going to remove the second and the fourth. Okay, and I'm just control clicking there, but you can do these individually if you like. Hit delete on your keyboard to remove those, and then I'm just going to click and drag the remaining keyframe here and drag it over so that these two are next to one another. Okay, so if we now control S to save, which you should just do religiously, if we select our character in the hierarchy, just so we can see things going in the inspector here, if we right click, we can set as layer default. Okay, and that'll allow us to preview this in the game. So you can see this is a little fast, right? He is nodding something awful here. This isn't coming across as an idle animation. So what we want to do is slow this right down. What I'm going to do is 0.15 seems to work well for me. And if you look now, he's sort of undulating up and down as though he's breathing, right? Instead of what he was before, which was like hyperventilating. So if we go ahead and stop the game running now, we've got our two animations here, which is nice and done for us. So the last thing to consider is we've only got a right facing animation so far. So how are we going to do the left? Well, if we run the game again, okay, and with our character selected, you'll notice we've got our sprite renderer here. We've actually got the ability to flip the sprite. So if we tick this box over here, just zoom in, just tick and untick. If we tick that, our player does indeed face in the other direction. So we don't need to create a second animation. All we need to do is manage when we flip our sprite via the sprite render. You can also flip on the Y to turn them upside down, but we're not going to need that this time. So what we're going to do in code, we're going to do two things. We're going to automate the flipping of our sprite based upon our movement input, and then we're also going to automate the animator so that we can pick which animation we want to be using based upon whether or not our character is or is not moving, and based upon which direction they're moving in. So let's go ahead and open up our player controller. So if you select the player, and then if you can see how we've got script down here, you can actually just double click on this and it'll open up the editor for you. Okay, now the first thing we're going to want to do is just a little bit of cleanup. So first we can remove our print statement from before, okay, and we can also just pop down here and we are going to add dot normalized to our movement direction. Okay, I explained in the previous video why you'd want to do that, but it just stops you from moving faster in the diagonal directions compared to the cardinal directions, which is up, down, left, and right. So with that done, we want to add a few dependencies because we're going to want to interact with the sprite renderer to do the flipping and the animator to change the animation. So we're just going to add serialized field, then we're going to do animator, okay, and we're going to do underscore animator. Okay, and then we're going to do another serialized field. We're going to do sprite renderer, and we're going to do underscore sprite render. Okay, now I normally forget to do this next step later on, and it ends up messing me up. So we're going to flip back over to the engine, and we're just going to do what's called plumbing, whereby we put the relevant components into the slot on the script. So I'm just going to go ahead over here. I'm going to click and drag the character once into this top slot and then once again into the bottom slot. Okay, and you can see that Unity is clever enough to know which components we mean based upon the type for the particular fields we've got here. So with that done, let's go back and let's add our logic. So the first thing we want to do is manipulate our sprite renderer's flip X based upon which direction we're facing. So it would be really nice if instead of dealing with numbers, we could deal with words to represent if we're moving up, down, left, or right. So to do that, we're going to create an enum. These are really handy, and it just basically allows you to assign words effectively to represent numbers. Okay, so we'll call this region enums. We'll do private enum. We'll call this directions. Okay, and then we open curly braces, and now we can put in as many words as we like into here, and behind the scenes, C# will assign values to these. Okay, so I'm going to do up, down, left, and right. Now, we've only declared this, we haven't really made use of it, so let's go ahead and create a variable which will make use of it. So we do private, and this time our type is of type directions that we've just created. And we will call this underscore facing direction. Okay, and by default, we'll set this to be right. Okay, and that's just because our animations at the moment, the only ones we've got are the right facing animations, but also that is going to be what we want to start with. So with our facing direction now, what we're going to want to do is create some logic to update this based upon our input. So what I like to do is compartmentalize my logic into functions that are nice and straightforward and tend to do just one thing. So I'm going to create a new region. This is going to be our animation logic that we're going to put in here. And our first function is going to be private void, and then we're going to do calculate facing direction. Okay, I don't want to send anything in here, so just leave everything empty. Now inside of here, what we're going to do is we're going to say if our movedir.x, bearing in mind that is the horizontal input, so it can be either the left or right arrow keys or the A and D key, if this is not equal to 0. Okay, so we're only going to worry about executing logic here if we are actually pressing A or D on the keyboard or the left or right arrow key. Then we're going to say if underscore movedir.x is greater than 0. Okay, this is the case when you're pressing the D key or the right arrow key. Okay, and we'll just leave ourselves a little note here. This is moving right. Okay, then we'll set our facing direction equal to directions.right. Okay, and now we'll do another one. We'll say else if underscore movedir.x is less than 0. Okay, this is us intending to move to the left. And we'll say underscore facing direction, is equal to directions.left. Okay, so when we've written code like this, it is always good to sanity check yourself. Okay, so all we're going to do is debug.log, and we're going to do our facing direction. Okay, so this is just going to print out whatever our current facing direction is. And bearing in mind, this is in the update function, which, by the way, we should add this in. So we are calculating the facing direction here. Okay, so in our update function, we first gather our input, and then we go ahead and execute this new function we've just made, which is to calculate the facing direction. And this is going to run as fast as the game runs. So we are going to be spamming the console here, but don't worry, that's fine. So back over in the engine, we're just going to pay attention to the console down here. Okay, I'm just going to zoom in there, and we should see this get flooded. Okay, so by default, it is set to right. So now if I press A on my keyboard, which is to move left, it changes to left, and if I move right, it changes to right. If I just zoom out so you can see the player is indeed moving, and then we are getting this updated. So that's great, that's now correct. So with our facing direction calculated, what we're going to want to do now is use this to determine if we want to flip our sprite or not. Bearing in mind, if we're moving left, we should flip the sprite, and if we're moving right, we shouldn't. So to do that, we're going to create yet another function. I'm going to call this private void, and I'm going to call this update animation. Okay, and the first thing we're going to want to do is just add this to our update loop so that we actually call it. Okay, and now inside of our private void update animation, what we're going to want to do is say if our underscore facing direction is equal to directions.left, then we will do our underscore sprite render, okay, dot flip x is equal to true. And then we'll say else if our underscore facing direction is directions.right, then we will do our underscore sprite renderer dot flip x is equal to false. Okay, so if we're moving to the right, we won't be flipping it, and if we're moving to the left, we will be flipping it. Okay, so again, we're going to go sanity check ourselves, make sure this is working. So here you can see as I move left now, we do indeed flip. And we can just, again, further sanity check, and we can pay attention over here. Okay, and just, if I just give focus to the window, sorry. If I move to the left, you can see it tick, and if I move to the right, it unticks. If we just zoom out so you can see the player and that happening. Okay, so that's working brilliantly. So now we've done that, what we next need to do is automate the transition between our animations. Okay, so when we're not moving, we should be using the idle animation, and when we are moving, we should be using the moving animation. So to do that, let's just go ahead and swap back over. Let's remove our debug.log. We no longer need that. What we do need, though, is some new variables. Our animator can be told to switch to an animation, but we need references to those animations to be able to tell it which animations to switch to. And in order to do that, we're going to create two references to our two animations we've got, which are going to be a private. We're going to use read only because we never want to change these in our code later on by accident. And they're going to be integers. And what we're going to call these is underscore anim move right is equal to, and now we're going to use animator, but critically, this is the uppercase version, okay? Because this is going to be a reference to the class animator, and it's not going to be a reference to our variable we've declared up here, okay? So here we're going to say animator dot, and then we're going to go string to hash, okay? And what this is going to require is the name of our animation clip. Now, don't forget, for us, what we've done is we've actually named our animation clips really sensibly, so we can remember those, because we know we set anim underscore player underscore move underscore right, okay? And because we've used a sensible naming convention, we don't now have to worry about trying to remember that or switch back to the engine and go and fetch that, right? So what we now need is the same line again, basically, but for the idle, okay? And it's always good practice when you're learning to type these out instead of copy pasting or letting IntelliSense take over, okay? So again, I'm just typing this out, but this time I'm being careful to go for the idle animation. So I'm just doing animator, string to hash, and then I'm going to do anim underscore player underscore idle this time, and to the right. So we now have references to our two animations, okay? So what we now need to figure out, okay, is are we moving or not? So in order to determine if we're moving, we have our underscore movedir. Okay, this is our directional vector that we compose based upon our input. And the beauty of a vector is they have what's known as a magnitude, which is their length, if you will. And in the case of us pressing any buttons on our keyboard, the magnitude is going to be greater than 0. Okay? Now it's good practice to use what's called the square magnitude, simply because it's slightly more performant than the regular magnitude. But in our case, it doesn't matter. Do you know what I mean? So we can use either of those, but we are going to use square just because it is a little more performant. And with this greater than 0, okay, if our square magnitude is indeed greater than 0, then we will be moving in this case. So we're moving, okay? And if we just go ahead and drop those braces on there, because this is a call to a function here, if we are indeed greater than 0 and we are moving, then we're going to want to grab our animator, and we're going to want to use a special function called crossfade. Now crossfade is super powerful, okay? We give it an animation and we give it a transition duration, and it will swap to that animation. Now we've already set these up, so it's underscore anim and then move and right. And for us, for all of our needs in this game, for the most part, our animation duration is just going to be 0. Because of our pixel art style, snapping our animation is going to be absolutely fine. So we've now transitioned to our moving animation when we're moving, but what about when we're not? Well, we just go underscore animator inside of an else, because here we know that we should not be moving in this case. And we do crossfade again, okay? And we do underscore anim, and then this time it's going to be idle right and 0, okay? So if we are moving, we use the moving, and if we're not, we're going to use the idle animation instead. So hopefully that should sort us out. And we should now be able to transition between our animations when we move. So if we take a look, you can see our player nice and steady, he's just breathing. And then as we move, he goes ahead and uses all 4 frames of animation from that movement animation clip. Okay, so he's doing really well. The benefit of how we set this up is it also works in the up and down movements as well. Even though we haven't got those particular animations included yet, because we're moving in any direction, our magnitude is going to be greater than 0, so he's always going to be using a movement animation. And we're going to leverage that in the next tutorial. So if you're interested in this crossfade, by the way, we can actually see it in action up here. If we select the character and look at our animator up here, as we move around, you can see it transition, right? And then when we let go, it goes ahead and goes to the idle. So that's everything we're going to do today. And in the next tutorial, we're going to go ahead and look at how we can include the up and the down animations. And we're also going to refactor some of our code to be a little bit cleaner using something called a ternary operator. So that wraps up our basic player animation. In the next tutorial, we'll be adding more animations and improving our code. If you're enjoying my content, then drop by my Discord to hang out and show me what you're working on. See you next time, boys.